Good evening to you all, our panelists, our viewers, our readers across the globe. My name is Ernest Mhlanga, and I'm the content manager at the Daily Dispatch, the media house of your choice. It is my single honor and privilege tonight to welcome you all to our virtual dialogue series, the first of its kind. The Dispatch Dialogue itself has a long history as a platform where issues of public interest are debated and perspectives between thought leaders and you, our viewers and our readers. Many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with our well-attended town hall dialogues, especially at the Guild Theatre. But then due to the coronavirus and the lockdown regulations, we had to resort to this platform. It is no surprise then that COVID-19 sort of informed our discussion for tonight under the topic, Pandemic and Dysfunction. What has COVID-19 revealed about the interface between national and local government? In hosting these dialogues, the Dispatch does not always go it alone. We always engage partners in the form of academic institutions, partners in the form of NGOs, and our sponsor for tonight's event is Afesis Corplan. Formed in 1992, Afesis Corplan is a progressive NGO that has immensely contributed to community development and good local governance in the Eastern Cape. To briefly tell us more about Afesis Corplan and today's discussion, it is my pleasure to introduce to you Ronald Eaton. Ronald is a sustainable settlement specialist, and he has been with the organization since the 1990s. That tells you that he knows it very, very well. Ronald studied city and regional planning at the University of Cape Town, for those you might want to know. So let me hand it over to him so that he can tell us more about Afesis Corplan and our today's discussion. Over to you, Ronald.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. Yes, my name is Ronald Eglin. I'm the specialist in sustainable settlements from Afesis Corplan. Afesis Corplan is an NGO based here in East London, or for those of you not from East London, it wouldn't be here, but you know where we are. We've been in existence for more than 30 years, working in the fields of land, housing, specifically around informal settlement development, and also in the field of local governance, where we support communities in their engagements with municipalities and government. Afesis Corplan, the word Afesis is a Greek word meaning liberation, because many people ask, what does Afesis Corplan stand for? Corplan stands for Community Research and Planning. This is our third dialogue. We are co-hosting and partnering with the Daily Dispatch. The first one was on looking at the issues of fake news and things like that. The second was on political manifestos. And this dialogue is our first virtual dialogue looking at pandemic and dysfunction. The purpose of this webinar and this dialogue is to provide an opportunity for us to learn from knowledgeable speakers and panelists who are going to be presenting tonight. It's also an opportunity to get us thinking and to stimulate discussion around the future of local governance and how local governance can be improved within municipalities. My job's quite easy. All I really have left to do is to introduce our moderator for the evening, Mr. Nkosinathi Biko, who will be introducing our panelists, and he will be facilitating the discussion during the evening. Mr. Biko is a founder and a trustee of the Steve Biko Foundation. He holds a bachelor's in social science and economics from UCT, and he also graduated in property development and finance from Wits University. Nkosinathi Biko is a published writer and an international speaker, and he is passionate about building a strong government and active citizen. So over to you, Mr. Biko, to moderate the evening.
Thank you, Ronald, and good evening, colleagues on this platform and those who are participating by way of other social media avenues. I'm delighted to be a part of this evening for three reasons, really. The first is the long-standing relationship between the Daily Dispatch as an institution, which was started by one of its leaders, Donald Woods, and of course the legacy of Steve Biko. The second is one of the pillars of Afesis Corplan, which coheres with what we seek to do through the Steve Biko Foundation, which is to encourage an active citizenry. And the third, of course, is that I know of very few platforms that have patrons as engaged and as opinionated as the patrons of the Dispatch Dialogue. So it's exciting to be a part of this platform this evening. Now, we have three distinguished panelists who will be assisting us to unpack the topic, Pandemic and Dysfunction, what has COVID-19 revealed about the interface between national and local governance. I will introduce the three of them and then proceed to give each one of them 10 minutes to give us their opening remarks. We will then proceed to a session where I will engage them based on specific questions, and then that would take about 20 minutes. And then the last component is an additional 20 minutes where we invite questions from our viewers. So I'm encouraging you to submit your questions so that we can collate them and hopefully get through as many of them as possible as part of the third leg of our engagement. So without wasting time, I want to start first with an introduction of Councillor Thembi Nkandimeng. Councillor Nkandimeng is the president of the South African Local Government Association, SALGA. She is also an executive mayor and is the mayor of Polokwane. In 2019, Councillor Thembi Nkandimeng was elected as the co-president of the United Cities and Local Governments during the World Summit of Local and Regional Leaders, the acronym for that institution being the UCLG. She holds a Bachelor of Arts honors, as well as a BPhil in Political Studies. She is committed to promoting multi-level governance in recognition of the role of local government to encourage development in policy formulation and implementation. The second panelist is Professor Jaap De Visser, who is the director of the Dalla Oma Institute. And he is a distinguished scholar with the South African National Research Foundation and co-author of Local Government Law of South Africa. His research, teaching, and consulting focuses on multi-level government, local government, good governance, and federalism in Africa. And he has published widely on these topics. He holds an LLB and an LLD from Utrecht University, as well as an LLM from the University of the Western Cape. The third speaker and panelist is Ms. Nontando Gamlen. And Nontando is also, of course, one of the sponsors tonight in that she is the executive director of Afesis Corplan. She's a seasoned development practitioner. She's a strategist and a social justice activist. She holds an MBA from the Netherlands, an MDiv, BSc honors, and a BSc in applied mathematics. She worked in the public, academic, and NGO sectors in the past and has extensive experience in good governance, accountability, and participatory democracy in local government. So as you will see, we are in good hands tonight. I will start in that order, inviting Councillor Nkandimeng to give us her remarks for roughly about 10 minutes. Over to you, Councillor Nkandimeng.
Thank you very much, Nkosinathi. Let me also greet my fellow panelists, Professor De Visser, and good to be in interaction with the same panel with Nontando Gamlen. We interacted last month at SAFM, if I'm not wrong, also on the topic of local government. We appreciate the important topic and the honor that has been given to SALGA for us to contribute. We see it fitting because local government is at the center of the response of COVID-19 pandemic. It is unfortunately true that the pandemic has exposed poor coordination, ineffective communication, and poor planning across the three spheres of government. We have in the past been raising concerns as SALGA about the ineffectiveness of disaster response, intergovernmental coordination structures of government generally. But because we have been fortunate prior COVID that the disasters which we have been facing have been isolated, in particular to provinces and municipalities. So these problems did not manifest in a way that the COVID pandemic has exposed us. For example, if you will have floods or droughts in any of the corners of our provinces in the country, would be far much less ideal, and municipalities and communities at that time will be left to fend for themselves, with very little assistance from national and provincial government. And again, it will appear that the attitude among some government officials in most cases is rather to neglect the pandemic that will be taking place, or rather the disaster that will be taking place at that particular time. The IGR disaster coordination in COVID-19 or under COVID-19 has seen us quickly as a country facilitating a national disaster management center, networks which are national joint operation committees, where all key stakeholders like Department of Justice, police, the security cluster in its entirety, social cluster, social development, education, public works in terms of infrastructure was established. Again, at the provincial level, there's what we call Prof Jobs, which are headed by the premiers, and the net job is headed by the president himself. At district level, the district mayors will do the same. So these were quickly established, and they were able to assist in facilitating and mobilizing action from all the spheres of government. However, even these structures were set, it became clear that government departments in provinces were not quite attuned to the work of these structures, and in particular the work of local government. I mean, for example, the disaster fund allocation. When the president announced the state of national disaster, both the Department of Health and Social Development were allocated funds immediately to deal with the disaster of COVID-19. But nothing was immediately allocated to local government. We all know that we've got 257 municipalities in South Africa. The total budget of this disaster fund, which was ultimately allocated 50 days after the lockdown had been set was only 350 million. So in essence, if you were to divide 257 municipalities with 350 million, they were going to get a fraction. But worse, even though this 350 was allocated, only 150 was sent 50 days, as I've said, to municipalities. And this made some municipalities to receive as little as 25,000 from the Disaster Management Fund. We made inputs as well in trying to assist when we realized that the money will not be sufficient, and requested that municipalities rather let them be allowed by the Minister of Finance to reprioritize their infrastructure conditional grant so that they are able to respond accordingly to the COVID-19 needs and necessities. Because some of the municipalities, Nati, for example, the ones that are small and rural, your Eastern Cape, KZN, Limpopo, Northern Cape, they are dependent mainly on equitable share allocation. So this will not be sufficient ordinarily. But the proposal of reprioritization was completely ignored, and it continued as business as usual. The president came into the picture and allocated and made a national announcement, to all we are aware, of 20 billion to municipalities. Again, this 20 billion was not immediately allocated to municipalities. I mean, for example, help at the immediate announcement, they were given 400 million. Department of Social Development, I think, were given around 350 million to manage COVID. But the president made the announcement in April, May of the 20 billion, but we had to wait until last week when the minister announced and only dispatched the funds as part of the supplementary budget. But we also were shocked because as part of that 20 billion, only 11 billion was allocated. The 9 was supposed to be taken out of the already allocated budget of municipalities, which means even the 20 billion that the president announced to assist municipalities with regards to COVID, it came only in a form of 11 billion. The roles and responsibilities, as you may know, in South Africa, for example, under the pandemic, put an extra burden on municipalities. For example, providing shelter for the homeless. What does our constitution say about this? Welfare services are part of, are stipulated in Part A of Schedule 4 of our constitution as a concurrent function of national and provincial government. But the Department of Social Development flatly refused to take the responsibility, and municipalities were left to fill the gap. As you have indicated in your introduction, that I'm also a mayor. I house even until today, a shelter for the homeless, where the entire district have placed such, in the main, young people, in the care of the municipality, which does not have psychological services, which does not have any health response. It was difficult for us to assess and be able to prioritize. Some of these hopeless people need medication. Some of them, they are on substance abuse and drugs. We put them into a center where they are unable to access such. They experience withdrawal symptoms. We don't know how to treat them. We don't know how to support them. And they become violent. We also had a scramble for food parcels. It was well reported. Of course, we must also appreciate that we had unscrupulous councillors who were alleged and some found in a court of law to have violated the disaster management regulation themselves. But immediately, such 19 councillors, to be precise, were found wanting. There was an open call that all councillors are not supposed to get involved. But it was becoming difficult for the Department of Social Development to be able to identify families which are needy because are known by ward councillors. So that in its own, it caused a delay between the movement of food from social development to needy families, and some, as a result, did not appropriately benefit because the identification process was weak. Municipalities are supposed to provide essential services, we all know. So rudimentary water and sanitation services normally and generally are what we're supposed to do on a day-to-day basis. But lo and behold, we all know that some municipalities are unable on a day-to-day besides the pandemic. Then when you have an outbreak of a pandemic, it means we need to turn the situation around as a country, particularly a pandemic which needs you to have sustainable sanitation, which needs you to have dignified sanitation, which also needs you to have constant water provision. Are you stopping me, Nat?
We have 1 minute, Tim.
Okay, I will wrap up. 600 million was made available quickly from national development, the government, to give water tankers and tanks to municipalities without consultation. They sit at the highest level, they hire tanks, trucks, they dispatch them to municipalities and create a gap. Now those trucks are going to be removed because they were rented. What is going to happen to those communities in the midst of COVID-19? So that is another sign of poor coordination and poor planning. I think I will communicate some additions as we debate and give other panelists a chance. And I will later on deal with DDM and some of the issues on how do we think we could deal with the silo mentality and the disintegrated planning at local government. Thanks, Nat.
Thank you, Councillor. I now would like to invite you, Professor Jaap De Visser, to please make your opening remarks, sticking again to the 10 minutes.
Thank you very much, Nkosinathi, and good evening, everyone. And I also greet my fellow panelists. It's great to be in your company and to be able to discuss this important topic with you. And many thanks for the invitation and the opportunity. And I've listened intently to Councillor Nkandimeng's input, and yeah, pretty much a lot of the issues that I wanted to raise have been raised by her. And because I was wondering, when I looked at the topic, firstly, I appreciated the topic as a very important one, and I think undervalued. We debate COVID-19 every day, but we don't very much talk about the role of local government in dealing with the pandemic. And local government is at the center of it. Local government is in charge of our public spaces and has such an important role to play in controlling the public environment that we need to manage to curb the pandemic, and also to deal with the fallout of the lockdown and all the difficult measures that we have to endure. And the picture that emerges is very much of a sphere of government that has, I think as most of us know, a very prominent place in our constitution. We have a very progressive constitution that protects local government, and there's lots of praise for the way our constitution has done that. But in practice, politically and financially, local government is often the recipient of instructions and the recipient of tasks that are often not very well conceived, and where local government is often not a part of the design of solutions. So one of my main questions for this evening is, to what extent has local government not only been at the center of dealing with the pandemic, but also how much has it been at the center of designing solutions? and co-designing the approach. I get the distinct impression that the approach to dealing with the pandemic is orchestrated from the center, with provinces, of course, playing a huge role, because that's where most of the public health response is located. And granted, provincial governments play an enormously important role in the testing and the hospitals and the public health response. But our cities and villages and municipalities, to what extent have they been able to influence the response? Or are they simply the recipient of instructions? The financial response, I think, as Councillor Nkandimeng has indicated, has been woefully inadequate. Frankly, the 11 billion rand new money, which is essentially what the entire special adjustment budgets amounts to for local government, is woefully inadequate. The numbers of the decline in revenue for municipalities as a result of the lockdown, and the crisis that they are staring in the face in terms of loss of revenue, but also increased poverty, which will put a further burden on for example, free basic services that will have to be extended. It goes way across that 11 billion. It cannot even begin to deal with the financial problems that are staring municipalities in the face. For example, only in Gauteng, I think the loss of revenue over the last 3 months already in the 3 metros amounts to 4 billion. So that's already 4 billion of financial trouble. And then we have only 11 billion for the entire sphere of local government. So I think there's a real problem in terms of how a local government is not seen as a mature partner in the response to this pandemic. And for me, as a lawyer, as a constitutionalist, it became very clear right from the onset, when the first lockdown regulations came about, that I was amazed at how quickly the national government abolished local democracy. Because in those first lockdown regulations, municipalities were essentially instructed to stop functioning as local councils, because the instruction was no municipal council shall meet, all councillors must stay home, all powers will be exercised by mayors and municipal managers, and the entire cohort of I think about 10,000 councillors throughout the country were rendered irrelevant for a few weeks. And it caused lots of confusion throughout local government, where councillors did not know where they fitted in. What was their role? They were not allowed to meet, and they were not allowed to function as councillors. They were not allowed to exercise oversight. And okay, national government backtracked, and after a couple of weeks, there was a new instruction to say, now you must all meet virtually. And again, a one-size-fits-all approach, where small councils of 10, 12 councillors were saying, but do we need to do virtual meetings? Because we can actually do social distancing in our town hall. So it's a very heavy-handed approach to local government, as it is a sphere that can be switched on and can be switched off. And I think that was, for me, was disappointing. And I think the intergovernmental structures that we have, the way in which national government enters into dialogues with local government, is of course mainly through SALGA, SALGA being a key partner in those intergovernmental structures. But I do think that the national government should make a much greater effort to involve local government more actively in those discussions. What I found, for example, encouraging is to see that some of our cities were invited to Parliament to give inputs to parliamentary committees on what their city response has been to the pandemic. And that's something new. That's something that we hadn't seen before. Because I do think that with the greatest respect to Councillor Nkandimeng, I know who's an excellent president of SALGA, but it's an extremely difficult task for one person to represent 257 municipalities in a massive intergovernmental meeting with the president and premiers and national ministers, and to then bring the voice of this variety of local government units into the national policy debate, ranging from your deepest rural municipalities with its problems to the city of Johannesburg and the city of Cape Town with its specific challenges and issues. I think we are underestimating the importance of involving local government in a much more coherent way in national policy making. I think that is something that we see emerging now as a problem, because I think if we really are honest with ourselves and we analyze what the debate is about COVID-19, the response, the lockdown regulations, etc., we don't hear the voice of local government strongly enough. We are wondering where are our mayors? Where are the mayors of the big cities? How are they pushing back against some of the measures that are really hurting local government? Do we see a coherent local government voice coming through, or do we only rely on SALGA to make those arguments as sort of a lone voice in the desert? And I think that's something that needs to be improved. To be fair, I think local government also has itself to blame in some respects. I think if we look at the governance in some of our major cities, I do think we have a problem. We have some of our metros don't have mayors at the moment. They have acting mayors and acting MMs and lots of difficulties there. And obviously that damages their voice and their legitimacy. And I think that's something that local governments must look itself in the eye for, that it must improve its acts and be a mature partner in intergovernmental relations. But I think on the whole, this pandemic has, like in many other issues, it has revealed fault lines that we knew were there. That yes, we have a strong local government system on paper, but when push comes to shove, it is the national government that toes the line and issues instructions to municipalities that are very often not the ones that really work at local level. Let me leave it at that for now, and I look forward to my fellow panelists' input. Thank you, Nkosinathi.
Thank you, Professor De Visser. And now I'd like to invite Nontando to please give us the opening remarks.
Thank you, Nkosinathi, for the opportunity. And good evening to the viewers, and good evening to my fellow panelists. And indeed, it is an honor to be in your company this evening. I just want to reiterate and center again the reason why we're having this conversation. Part of it is because there is not a square meter in South Africa that is not in a municipality. There is not a city. And so if COVID impacts a household, it impacts a household that is in a city or in a rural village or on a farm that belongs to a municipality. And so the centrality of local government in conversations about COVID-19 cannot be understated or overstated. And I just want to very quickly pick up on something that Professor De Visser has mentioned just now, right? This notion of the narrative about local government. Because at the core and at the center of it is the story that we have told about local government over time and that we've come to believe. And you see that in actions and behavior, particularly that of our national and provincial leaders. And part of that narrative is that local government is a sphere led by corrupt, irresponsible persons who cannot be trusted to make decisions that are in the best interest of the public and the country. So we hear every day that local government squanders resources, squanders money, does not deliver services, steals food parcels, a councillor steals food parcels, and all sorts of such ills are amplified as though they are done by every municipality and every councillor or official in local government. So that's the dominant narrative. And we don't often look at the role that oversight mechanisms and other departments, both the provincial and national government, play in local governments, whether in strengthening or weakening local government. And so we don't reflect on that role. And I want to flag that as that dominant destructive narrative that has painted local government as that sphere that cannot be trusted with resources and with decision making. Secondly, I want to highlight a culture problem. And this goes back to the first administration, really, the manner in which the ANC in government organized itself and allowed what was a political culture to influence a culture in government. And so there is a sense of a seniority between local, provincial, and national government. And you would see this in how a list is organized, right? And then how, if you are number one or you're in the highest ranks in the list, you would then go to national, or you'd be deployed to the national structures. The lower in the list you are, the potentials that will either be in a provincial or in local government, deployed to local government. And that manner of seniority, which has everything to do with caliber, skill, capability, has led us to believe that our best brains and best minds are found in national government. And what then you will find in local government are the people in the lowest rungs of the list. And therefore, obviously, the people that are in national government are the people that know amongst themselves that they're the best of the crop, and therefore must be trusted with decisions that then must permeate through all of the system of government. And that's a culture issue. And that's a culture issue that we have not engaged over time. And the third thing that I would like to highlight is obviously the IGR framework and our IGR practices. If anything, COVID-19 has flagged for us the deep failures with our IGR systems and our IGR mechanisms. And I'm interested to hear what Executive Mayor Nkandimeng is going to say about this integrated district development model, the DDM, or the new thing, and how that's going to play out. Because what we know of planning mechanisms across all of government is that they're not the same. And that to try and harmonize complex planning systems that have been calibrated over time into this DDM thing that must now work at a district level is a very interesting thing that we're all looking at how best one could achieve that. When you're trying to do that in a system and a culture of silos and my plan, my turf, compounded by all sorts of, for want of a better word, all sorts of schisms that are going on at the political party level that has an influence in the manner and the culture and the way decisions are made and cascade between national, provincial, and local government and the impact that has one to the other. Obviously, what COVID-19 has taught us is that we still haven't figured out how to blend together. Even in the face of the pandemic, we are yet to figure out how to blend together. And there's certain things that need to change, fundamental systemic shifts that must happen, both at a culture level, at a behavior level, but also at an institutional level. And that's an uncomfortable conversation. And it is a conversation that we're not seeing happen at this point in time. And I mean, the questions of what decision was made where and the impact that it has at local government, as my colleagues have alluded to some of the decisions that were made. Of course, we're likely to see that and more in the environment that local government finds itself in. And yes, some of the challenges that local government has are self-inflicted. But I think on the whole, there are some aspects that are very deep and fundamental, has to do with culture, with the institutional arrangements, with behavior, with the ways that we plan and the mechanisms that we have that we need to engage and talk about. And that's a conversation that we're not having, in my view. I'll leave it at that for
now. Thank you, Nontando. And thank you, colleagues, for those wonderful remarks, opening remarks. I want to start perhaps with a question directed at Councillor Nkandimeng. Professor De Visser argues that whereas our constitutional framework and legislative framework is poetic, perhaps the real issues lie in practice. And it would appear that a lot of hope is pinned on the new framework, this district development model that the government had launched last year. What about it is different from how we were doing things? Or is it yet perhaps another framework that will remain poetic but impractical?
Thank you very much, Nat. I think DDM is trying to assist us to self-correct. It's nothing new. If you check the white paper of local government in South Africa, crafted in 1997, spoke about cluster management of municipalities at what you call districts now. Whether you would have called them regions or districts, it's immaterial. But it said centralize your resources, centralize your skill so you could better implement and coordinate at a municipal sphere and be able to implement efficiently what you are mandated to deliver. The system was started, if I'm not mistaken, it got to be unbundled again to what we are currently doing by National Treasury somewhere around 2002, 2001. Government changed the district cluster coordination process into strengthening local municipalities. I don't think it was an incorrect decision. It possibly was a premature decision, particularly when it did not safeguard how we maintain the skills that had been developed at that particular time and centralize them into local government or into local municipalities. But it also did not put stopgap measures on how are we going to manage and ensure that, for example, Section 71 of the Municipal Management Act says municipalities must write monthly reports to the department of COXTA, that is your cooperative department, at the provincial level, and also to National Treasury to account. But Nontando was talking about the gross corruption and maladministration that happens. It shows that there's nobody who actually sits properly in these two departments and read this month-to-month reports, because now the district is not necessarily responsible, but National Treasury and cooperative government at the provincial level are. And these are the weaknesses. And as a result, councils ran amok in most instances. Executive directors were suspended in most instances without any reason. Council recruited themselves without any strong measure of supervision, though there is a process which says if you want to appoint, you need concurrence as a mayor from your provincial MEC. But as a result, you find quite a lot of people who today were saying are not qualified. They went through these processes because even this concurrence is not necessarily legislated. So councils will just want and do their own appointments. But in some instances, your law enforcement agencies will also not be helpful to councils, because there are a number of councils where if I'm a devious manager or director, I'll be taken through to the processes, the case reported, but nothing will happen. And then a culture of erosion of skills, of erosion of coordination, of planning, of implementation was eroded to what we are having today. So what is the president of the country saying? He's saying back to the basics again, because this, what we are doing, is enshrined clearly in our white paper, which was adopted in 1997. So it's ourselves going back to where we actually should have been 20 years as we are in local government in this December.
Thank you, Councillor. And Nontando, you speak about this predominant narrative, a narrative that runs off the culture of the political party system to drain local government of the best of its talent, a narrative about non-performance. Surely you're not suggesting that this is an unfounded narrative. If you look at the findings of the Auditor General about the performance of municipalities and so forth, if you look at issues such as clean governance in the last 3 years being 14, 8, and 7% unqualified reports, are you suggesting that this is an unfair narrative? Are you suggesting that this is a basis we must recognize in order to fix things at local government municipalities?
It absolutely is not an unfounded reality. I think the core of my argument is that much as there is poor management of resources at the local government level, there is the same, if not more, at provincial government level and at the national level. But when we speak of it, we speak of it as if it only is an ill that is happening at a local government level. And so there is this big focus at local government level as being irresponsible with resources and therefore cannot be trusted with key decision making. I think that was the essence of that argument. And as Mayor Nkandimeng says, provincial government has, particularly COGTA and Treasury, they have oversight responsibilities over local government month to month, in year, before even the Auditor General comes. That when the Auditor General comes at the end of a financial year, finds a dismal state of affair in a municipality, is indicative of the failures of the built-in oversight mechanisms and the role that these provincial and national structures are to play in strengthening local government. And I think that's the essence of the argument is, in decision-making, there is a general acceptance of local government as failing, as being a big sinkhole, and therefore decisions are parachuted into local government because we can't necessarily trust local government with all these resources. You see that attitude in the manner that we've responded to COVID-19. The first departments to receive resources weren't necessarily the municipalities that must provide water, that must collect refuse, who were suddenly inundated with huge operational costs because the pace and the quality of service delivery, basic service delivery, needed to improve. But the first resources, the first slices of the cake went to national departments and then to provincial departments. And that, in my view, is as a result of the dominant narrative that we've allowed to thrive over time, which we need to engage.
Thank you. And now, Professor, you speak about the problem of central government planning such that municipalities have been mere recipients of instructions and of tasks. Can you perhaps speak about the constitutional challenges around that issue? You speak about the suspense, literally, of the operations of the municipality as part of the response in the first couple of weeks. What problems do you see us encounter when we look back and view this through the lens of our national constitution?
Thanks. Well, I think as an academic, I'll have the luxury of doing a bit more research into that. And in fact, we have a few students that are actually setting out to sort of look back a bit and analyze. So what happened and what kind of instructions were issued and how did they play out in practice, and were they in fact constitutional? And I don't think that the Disaster Management Act single-handedly displaces the Constitution and the way local government operates in terms of that Constitution. But somehow we have a national government that thought that with a Disaster Management Act, you can then abolish local democracy and you can issue all kinds of instructions to municipalities, even though they quite clearly are against the constitutional division of powers. And granted, it's a crisis situation, so one doesn't want to be splitting hairs over the niceties of constitutionalism. However, these issues do tend to linger and they tend to set a precedent. For example, what I had difficulties with is the notion that you can sideline elected representatives at local government level for a number of weeks, and that in that period you also embark on all kinds of emergency procurement. That's a fertile ground for all kinds of mischief, and I don't think we even know yet what kind of mischief has been happening also in municipalities in those first couple of weeks of the lockdown, where there was no oversight, there were no council meetings. Mayors and municipal managers and CFOs could basically do as they please. And I know many of them, and the ones that I know, I all trust blindly, but I know there are many out there that are not genuine and that have been using this to advantage themselves. And I think that for me is problematic. So over and above the constitutional issues, which one can debate and one can write interesting academic pieces about, I think we have a real issue with local government shooting itself in the foot when it comes to that narrative that Nontando raised. And I think that is also informing national government's approach to local government. And I think we need to have a bit more of a nuanced look at that. I mean, to go back to the issue of corruption and governance. And tomorrow the Auditor General is again presenting this horrific figures of the report on local government finances. I don't even listen to it anymore because it becomes such a depressing refrain that every year seems to be getting worse. What really upset me was a bit of news that went around a few weeks ago. It was a question that was raised in Parliament to the Minister of Justice. The Minister of Justice was asked, how many people have been convicted in local government for financial misconduct over the last decade and a half? Because we have all these disciplinaries going all over the place, people suspended, people fired. We have these horrific Auditor General reports. We have these interventions in municipalities. It's going thick and fast. So clearly there's a big problem. Now, the startling response by the Minister of Justice was that over the last decade and a half, 9 people have been convicted, a total of 9 people. So that means, frankly, that it pays to be corrupt in local government because there is no deterrence. The worst thing that can happen to you is the Auditor General will write a bad report about your municipality, but in the end, that's also it. If you're unlucky, you get suspended, but you get protracted litigation and these things end up taking forever and you'll be suspended for 2 years on full pay. But the real deterring factor of jail time, we are not seeing that. And I think this is, as Councillor Nkandimeng is saying, yes, of course, we can all point our fingers at the crooks in local government, and we must do so. But this is also a problem that national government is causing. Because national government is very quick, particularly the National Treasury, is very quick to write lots of laws regulating local government. Local government is a heavily regulated sphere. And there's very little that municipal officials can do without having to tick so many boxes in the Municipal Finance Management Act. So there's no shortage of law that national government has created with all kinds of tripwires for municipal officials. But it has never really paid any effort and emphasis on creating capacity in our law enforcement agencies to investigate and prosecute issues in local government. I have many stories that I can tell of municipal managers that will tell me, I hand a full case, a full docket, investigated to the detail, to SAPS, to the Hawks, and they lose it. The file gets lost. Or I get a call 2 years later from a prosecutor saying, I now have to make this case, but frankly, I don't understand any of it. This is all very complicated, and can you please help me? So our SAPS, Hawks, and the NPA are woefully under-equipped and ill-equipped to deal with corruption in local government. And until we have that sorted out, we are going to see the impunity continue, and that narrative will grow. And it will keep informing the way we see local government as, you know, the stepchild of the 3 spheres of government and the naughty one that always gets it wrong. And that really worries me about what we see.
On this question of corruption, Prof, is it not the case, though, that this is a problem that extends well beyond just local government, provincial government, and even national government? Corruption in South Africa is a systemic issue that's pretty well embedded also in the private sector. If you look at the audit findings or the audit issues that played out in 2017, for which really nobody, including sign-off executives, have as yet been prosecuted. In other words, what we're seeing in local government may very well be a microcosm of a larger problem about how the country deals with the issue of corruption. Is that not a proposition you believe in?
No, most definitely. You're absolutely right on the money. That's true. It's something that pervades the 3 spheres of government. And I think we obviously, but I don't think we focus enough on corruption in local government. We obviously have gotten used to the big corruption stories, state capture, the Guptas, the Zondo Commission, and you know they are convening again, and day in, day out, you hear the testimony of the grand corruption at our state-owned entities. But the small-time corruption in localities that goes unseen, which can start with, you know, just the local caterer that inflates the catering invoices to the municipality in return for and there's one official in the municipality that gets a kickback. right down to the grand corruption that is, I think, well known here in the Western Cape with, the land issues and the developers here in the Western Cape who really have a strong grip on some of our municipalities here, and there's some very grand corruption happening as well, and we don't hear enough about that. And I think it's starting to play into this narrative of municipalities as the naughty stepchild, and I think that needs to be addressed. And
Nontando, earlier when we spoke about, and many of the panelists spoke about the own goals scored by municipalities and municipal leadership, but that sphere of government is the one that is closest to the people. What is the role of civil society in dealing with some of the issues that we need to attend to? So if we throw money at local government and it lacks the capacity to implement this, what are institutions like yours and many, many others out there that have capacity doing or should be doing in responding to this COVID challenge?
So in response to that question, I'm going to refer again to something that Professor De Visser has raised. This matter of the overregulation in local government. And so because local government is so overregulated, one step outside of the checklist of things to be done, how they must be done, leads one into trouble. So for example, even if a municipal manager, the most talented and the most innovative, wanted to co-create solutions and partner in creative and meaningful ways with civil society, business, and others, they are limited in how they could go about doing that because of just the regulation and the need for compliance and the focus on compliance in local government. And unfortunately, the audit process in local government looks more on how you've complied and whether you followed the steps that the steps have been given to you. And I think the unintended consequence of the regulations has been that it's elbowed out of local government, civil society, business, and others who could bring skills to partner and co-create meaningful service delivery solutions. And I mean, that's the environment that we find ourselves in. It's difficult to partner and to do things with local government in meaningful ways. I mean, the examples where people are trying things, particularly now in the midst of COVID-19, but I mean, those are by the side. They're not in the rubric of what local government is trying to do in responding. So those are by the way, either or little interventions here and there. They're not mainstreamed into the core of local government's response at this point in time because the environment does not necessarily allow for that to happen.
Right, and Councillor, in your capacity as the co-president of the United Cities and Local Governments, you are interacting with colleagues from other environments, including perhaps the United States as an example. Elsewhere, governments have been blamed for their response, both at the level of national government as well as the other spheres of government. And one of the worst examples playing out seems in particular to be the United States. What conversations are you having? What is the world saying we are doing correctly and incorrectly in response to this pandemic through our governance system?
Thank you, Nati. Coincidentally, the past 2 weeks, we had our UCLG session via Zoom, and we're trying to compare country to country, how strong have we been as governments been able to respond appropriately to COVID-19 challenges as we face them. And how prepared our state or government have been able to put up systems on time or timelessly to be able to respond, but also to take care of its citizens. The gaps are more or less the same, and the challenges could either be in areas, even in well-developed countries, there are generally poor people, people who are in the streets, who are homeless, who the policies and the guidance of government in different countries have not been handled according to their policies, or there have not been any existence of such policies which have fallen to the latter to respond to COVID-19 pandemic challenges that are faced by each and every country. But of course, with Africa in particular, you get a sense where there is lack of resources, there's lack of skills. Not that there are no skills. I think we are unable to get government to attract the proper, correct skills that each and every country has to be able to serve its people. Somehow the system, when it gets to select who is supposed to serve, I think just does not have a way of correctly appointing a required skill. Not that countries are without those skills, because people now incrementally are becoming educated compared to when you started your government, for example, in 1994, if you were to compare Africans versus the white population at the time. The numbers now are sort of stabilizing, and we could be able to recruit appropriately with necessary skills that could be able to assist us. But somehow we don't get the system to be able to do that, and then that gets to be overtaken by maladministration and ultimately a trust deficit that people who are even willing or could have the inclination to work for government prefer not to, because it is seen as a sphere in the sector that is frustrating and is not allowing professionals to be sound on themselves. We've looked into the issue of how do we treat, for example, foreigners in our countries across the world in response to the pandemic. And most of us have been found wanting, asylum seekers have been found wanting in how do we respond to them. Do we as government prefer to treat them as citizens of that particular country, or we isolate? We have our own good example here at home, where Corplan had to say, you've got to deal with such issues differently. But across the world, it has been that to such an extent that we felt that we need to be able to say that the rights of everybody, poor or rich, under the pandemic needs to be protected equally. So I think we've not been ready for the pandemic, but countries that are better developed in terms of infrastructure and systems have been better than countries compared to Africa. We don't have sufficient hospitals on a day-to-day, where we don't have medication in our clinics, where we don't have necessary staff, we don't have sufficient social workers. We had to start from that bottom, but each and every country had its own challenges that it had to deal with.
Thank you, colleagues. I want to take us to the second part of this engagement, which includes questions coming through from our viewers. And we are reminded by Tsinga that this is, of course, not just an issue about isms. And he is asking the panel about this issue of human casualties and whether or not we have hit the height. And I may add, I'm directing this question at Nontando. I may add that against the backdrop of the minister's comments, what should communities, what should people be doing for themselves, as of course they meet government halfway in ensuring that the catastrophe ahead of us is less destructive?
All right. I think one of the big things that we can be asking each other as South Africans and as people as citizens in local government generally is how active of agents are we, both taking charge of our own lives, of our own environments, without necessarily waiting for somebody else to come in and save us. So simple things like disposing of our refuse in ways that are not harmful to our neighbor, or in informal settlements, making sure that we maintain our environments and our communal facilities, our communal water. We make sure that they're not vandalized, destroyed. You know, the basic things that requires one to be an agent themselves, but also to be a leader in their community. And I mean, when we talk about leadership, we're not necessarily talking about elected leadership, but we're talking about people who are taking responsibility for themselves and for their environment. And so those are the basic things. It takes us back to the ethos of who we are and who we are as a people, and who we want to be, and working towards that goal. And so if one were to ask me now, what are some of the things that we need to do? Are the basics. Not only take care of yourself, but take care of yourself and make sure that you take care of the person that's next to you as well. And if they're not, call them to order as well. So some of the basic social distancing and hygienic practices that we're being told every day to uphold and to establish, those are the basic things. It starts there, it starts at that level. So I'd encourage us to be active in that way and to hold each other to account, obviously, in our spaces, before we can even attempt to hold government to account. Thanks, Wilson.
Thank you. And for you, Prof De Visser, Umane Matiwane wants to know if there is a conflict between the process prescribed by the National Disaster Act and Section 160 of the Constitution and the disaster management policies of municipalities. Are there issues there that were not considered by the councils in fighting the spread of the virus?
I'll have to be careful in answering this because it's a legal question, so you're always a bit put on the spot to give legal advice, you know, from a panel. So it's always a bit tricky. But I think I hear what the question wants to go at, which is we have a constitution that gives municipal councils a fair degree of discretion to regulate their internal affairs and to determine who within the municipality is responsible for certain parts of the municipal affairs, you know, through a policy of delegations. You know, that, for example, a municipal council may decide through its delegation policy to allocate certain tasks to committees, to the executive mayor, to the municipal manager, and to essentially organize its internal administration the way it makes sense for that municipality, within limits, because, you know, there are certain things that the Constitution prescribes must be done by councils, such as adopting a budget. You can't delegate that to the municipal manager. Or adopting an IDP must also be done by the council. You can't delegate that to the mayor. So there's rules, but within those rules, there's a lot of discretion for municipalities to determine who does what within the municipality and at what level are certain decisions made. And now in comes the Disaster Management Act and the regulations under that Disaster Management Act, and says, no, that doesn't apply. That discretion doesn't apply now. And we will now dictate from Pretoria who's going to do what in your municipality. And I think there's a constitutional problem. And I think that that's something that national government was a bit too hasty about, to dictate to municipalities how they should determine their own affairs. And I also think, for example, that it is not right and not constitutional for a national government to prescribe to municipal councils how they must run their meetings. I understand that it was a crisis situation and very unusual that we had to resort to virtual council meetings and social distancing. But still, on balance, I think national government was a bit trigger happy and a bit quick to adopt a one-size-fits-all, to in 1 week saying you may not meet at all, and a few weeks later come to the conclusion, hang on, we do want you to meet because you have to adopt a budget. So now you must all meet over the internet. And there didn't seem to be any room for just municipal innovation. You know, I would say let municipal councils determine how they deal with this. You know, they are best placed to determine how they run their meeting responsibly. They're not little children. And to treat them like that, I think is unbecoming, and frankly, I think it's unconstitutional.
Thank you, Prof. And Councillor, I want to combine two questions. The first is from Jeff Walton, and the second is from Vusi Gomose. And they speak to the issue of capacity within municipalities or lack thereof. Jeff asks, with all the officials doing the MFMA competency courses, why are the audit results so poor? Right? And that's the first part of the question. And Vusi says, how can we sustainably foster a social compact between relevant stakeholders to reverse the detrimental loss caused by lack of financial, technical, or administrative capacity in local governance, where the interface between national and local government has failed to address this challenge, resulting in a systemic dysfunction. For example, municipalities have depended heavily on consultants to compensate for this gap, and COVID-19 has exposed this issue. If you could speak to those two questions combined. You must unmute, Councillor.
I'm sorry. Thank you very much. I forgot to unmute. I'll start with the first one, the one of MFMA competency courses. We didn't reach the target. When the system was formed, National Department of Treasury and COPTA put up a competency assessment formula, and it was approved by the University of Pretoria and University of Witwatersrand for councillors and directors in particular to be competent in those 10 areas that were isolated. Now, at the time that was effected, there were current staff who were employed. And if I'm not wrong, they were given around 3 years to complete that. And there was a due date that at the beginning of 2007, there must not be any director who gets to be employed who does not possess the competencies that were enshrined. That has been postponed since then, 2009 till today. Now, there will be variation from one minister who says, okay, you can appoint, but give them 18 months after they've been appointed to finish off the MFMP competency assessment. Again, there will be nobody who will go and check as to whether councils have really complied with the MFMP requirements in the Section 71 reports. But there were quite a number at the beginning of people who complied. The system bled, particularly because in the main, council is the employer. People qualify, you become a chartered accountant, you're hired, they're not even trained by council. You're hired a chartered accountant, you're a CFO. You are hired in the municipality where the councillor speaking is the executive mayor. You don't agree with the system, which is heavily political. We must accept that. Council will just willy-nilly stand up and take a decision that Nontando CFO CFO is suspended. After 90 days, they can't even form charges. What happens to Nontando? She's a professional. KPMG, Deloitte, or anybody else will take it and we lose the scheme. That has happened. There are so many cases. Some of them have lost them in a labor court where labor court said you are unfair, you do not have a case against this individual. And ultimately, the sector is unable to attract. In the municipality where I am, I've advertised 3 positions for director, transportation, corporate services. I can't remember the third one. 2, 3 times. If in the one West instance, I got 11 applicants, I could not even begin to look at them. They were very junior. I went to council to headhunt and asked for professional HR hiring companies to headhunt. And people will write back and say, I'm not interested to be employed in local government. So we've made a submission as SALCA to the portfolio committee to say we need even requirements for councillors. Precisely because if you are a councillor at the city of Johannesburg, you are overseeing a budget of no less than 90 billion. Now you have got metric. You possibly can't even read a financial report and understand it and be able to perform your oversight. The second part of that, councillors are trained through LGCT. 1% of every 257 municipalities makes around 900 million, close to 1 billion, to LGCT. We're trying to ignite the economy at local government, for example. We get a course accredited. In my province, we had 300 councillors registered for that course, only 15 graduated. What does that say? It says we need to be able to measure oversight with implementation where administration is supposed to be. So there's no easy, one simple bullet solution called DDM that will achieve that. But if we also continue not to be truthful to ourselves, what are the challenges, then I don't think we'll find solutions. The revenue loss and consultants, it also has got to do with the grading system of municipalities. The poorer and the smaller the municipality, the less paid it is. Let's take Polokwane as an example. Our CFO is paid around 1.5, 1.8 million per annum. He has just received a qualified audit. It will be announced tomorrow, sadly. But you go to Sengu municipality, a very small municipality in the Eastern Cape. I think it's graded 3. Each CFO should be getting around 350,000 or so per annum. Now they need a chartered accountant to live with all the regulations we have been talking about and all the GRAP and score and write all those reports like the CFO of Polokwane will be writing. Yet they have got a clean audit. Not once, I think it's 7 or 6 years in a row. But we do not remunerate them accordingly, even when their performance is steady. Because they are grade 3, their CFO will still be earning around 400,000 per annum. Because Polokwane is grade 5, it will pay its municipality higher because it has got resources. And so you've got to change the situation around. It needs to be linked to performance. Have you performed? What are we going to do about it? What are we going to enhance? How are we going to hold you accountable? Of course, the review of the Audit Act has happened, but is the AG capacitated to be able to deal with 257 municipalities at a go? By the way, tomorrow he'll be announcing only 15 clean audits out of 257, somewhere there. So now the Act has been reviewed, he's been given more powers. I'm not speaking on his behalf, but I don't think he'll be able to walk into all those 200 odd municipalities at the go and say, I said this, I said that, bring it, bring it, bring it, bring it, I'm holding you accountable. Until we put accountability right where it should be, on top of the table, we may not be able to turn the situation around. Live by ensuring that the value chain and all the stock measures are put in place, and everybody, Corplan, National Treasury, and municipality are held accountable from its council down to its employees. Then we will win the battle.
Thank you, Councillor. And now we have about 5 minutes to wrap up, and I'd like each one of you perhaps a minute and a half, just to give some concluding remarks. And against this backdrop, we've seen in Makana that citizens are becoming more proactive in taking charge of what must happen at municipal government level. We have also recently witnessed a judgment by Judge Madlanga, which now introduces new possibilities for independent candidates, certainly at provincial and national government, but also highlights the role of independent voices at municipal level. We have elections coming up. What should we be hearing? What messages should we be hearing as we listen attentively for solutions in the build up to the elections coming? And I'll start perhaps with Nontando, and then I'll come to you, Prof, and wrap up with Councillor. A minute and a half.
Thank you, Nkosinathi. I think one of the key things that we're likely to see now post-COVID-19 is increased demand on municipalities to provide services. We're likely to see greater numbers of people moving into cities in search of jobs and better opportunities. And so the demand on municipalities to deliver basic services is going to increase. This is happening in a society that is largely becoming quite in tune with what their rights are and are largely demanding those rights. And so we no longer have a passive citizenry that's waiting for the state to deliver, and that's giving the elected government space to figure governance out, right? Like we had in the 90s and the early 2000s. Now we have a far more actively engaging citizenry. So we're likely to see more of cases such as Makana. And if it's not a case that is processed through a court, it will be processed on the streets in one way or another. And so it is not going to be business as usual in municipalities. And so where we have councils that are not getting their act together, both in delivering services in ways that they should, doing oversight in the ways that they should, and curbing corruption as best as they can, they're likely to see more pressure coming from the streets. And so it's time for local government to really reform itself, or figure out ways of reforming itself, because if it's business as usual, by the time we get to the next local government election, the next 5 years of administration in local government are going to be really difficult. Thanks, Nkosinathi.
Prof?
Thanks. I'm happy you're raising the elections, because you're right, local government elections are around the corner, and one of the issues that has been raised in this run-up to this election is, why don't we combine local government elections with national and provincial elections? And I think that would be such a bad idea, because I really hope that next year's local government elections will be about local government, and that we don't have an election where we're all just worried about one thing, which is who's going to be the next president, and that we actually have local government elections in which our electorate will hold our local governments accountable for local issues. And for example, that you will vote for the party that has done the best in your locality when it comes to water and sanitation during COVID-19, that has done well in sanitizing public places, that has done well in helping law enforcement without harassing or even killing people, that has done well in ensuring food security for those who were left without livelihoods during the lockdown, where mayors have been active in raising awareness around sanitizing and hygiene, et cetera, and that the elections can be about that and not about, do I have mythical feelings towards this party or that party, and is that what I'm basing my vote on? Because in the end, local government should be about local accountability, that we really can see elections to be an accounting to the local electorate about how well I have done as a mayor, as a councillor in this particular municipality. And that is what it should be about. And I think our voters must also take responsibility and judge municipalities and not just cast their votes based on ideology or party allegiance, but really hold councillors accountable.
And Councillor, wearing the activist hat.
Thank you very much. I wear it all the time. I think I've just got two comments. The first one, and I think Nontando spoke about it a little bit. It's about communities themselves rising and demanding what is rightfully theirs. You know, when the local government sphere is unable to provide the services that it's supposed to offer to its communities, it shows, and it shows immediately. There will be litter everywhere else, waste at every corner. There will be waste treatment works which have not been serviced, and it will be running over the streets, and children will be, you know, it just becomes a place where it's unhygienic, but it's also not proper to stay in. But if I call an IDP meeting as a mayor, I can also show you how many people do not understand the right and they have to hold me accountable as a mayor, to report to them what did I do with their money and what do I plan to do with what will be allocated from me from tomorrow. And I think if we have active citizens, we will also be held accountable. We do not only rely on the AG and law enforcement agencies, but communities themselves will be saying, this is how much you've been given by National Treasury. Here is your road. It is not quality road, and we demand a better response and a better service for what you've been allocated for on our behalf. So we need to encourage active citizenship. If it has to be assisted by a court of law, in my view, Prof, it is a bit of an overreach, the Makana issue, but I understand their frustration, and they've been granted by a court of law. I know Enoch Mkijima has also made such an application, so it could be coming in our courts anytime soon. I know in a municipality where my mom is residing tonight, she has no electricity, ESCOM is disconnected. They are also mobilizing themselves in governing Biko to go to the court and demand their rights. Let it be. The last part is 2.3 were independent candidates in local government. We had over 63,000 candidates, most of them coming from parties, political parties to contest the 2016. 855 were independent candidates, of which half of them made it. So I think the Electoral Court took a correct decision, but also I agree with Prof. Much as it is costly to run separate, independent, or different elections 2 years in a row, it will be very much difficult for the local government voice to be heard at the local system as it is today if those elections are collapsed and be made together. I think we need to fix the system. We need to get it right. We need to get local government where it is and where it's supposed to be, to service everybody excellently, and then join the elections. But that is for parties to decide. But honestly, I agree with Prof that we may have to work on the system as it is, correct it, perfect it, and then think of changing into another way. I guess there was a reason why they were separated even in the beginning. Thank you very much.
Thank you, colleagues. You have been a very disciplined panel. We cost Ernest just 3.5 minutes, 4 minutes. But let me thank you all, and of course remind our viewers, as we should remind ourselves, that active citizenship requires us to be engaged even between elections and not only at the time of appointing political leadership. And with those words, I hand over to Ernest to wrap up our program. Please unmute.
Okay, thanks so much, Nkosinathi. On behalf of the Daily Dispatch, our senior management, led by our General Manager, Ryan Mago, and our editor, Kiara Carter, our holding company, Arena, and of course, our sponsors for tonight, Afesis Corplan. I would want to thank our moderator for tonight, Nkosinathi Biko, for leading this discussion very well. Thanks to our panelists, Nontando Ngamlana, Professor De Visser, and Councillor Nkandimeng for those insightful and incisive reflections on our topic tonight. And I'm sure all our viewers would agree with me that we now understand better. We always blame local government without the hindsight of the real challenges and the real problems that they are facing. When you look at the audit reports, we would always say, oh, such and such a municipality is awful. Okay, only 20% of the total municipalities that we have clean audits. What's happening? But I think Councillor Nkandimeng has really highlighted what are the real challenges, what are the real problems. I may also thank our viewers for joining us tonight. We always enjoy your company. And be on the lookout. We'll be inviting you for yet another virtual dialogue in not distant future. Whatever the situation, we will not stop dialoguing, because dialoguing is something that we enjoy. Dialoguing is something that keeps us going. Those who follow the dispatch almost every day, you would have noticed that because of this coronavirus, we have also created a platform on our print edition every Thursday, where we have a dispatch in dialogue, where we share ideas, where we reflect on main issues. We started around end of April, where we focused on the role of unions. We moved to the main issues around the coronavirus, whether the schools should be opened or should not be opened. We moved to issues around whether we should move from lockdown 5 to lockdown level 4. And for this week, we'll be unpacking Finance Minister Tito Mbowene's budget. Please grab your daily dispatch on Thursday morning and read on our other various platforms on what we'll be sharing. If you have any topic that you want tackled every Thursday, please feel free to send me an email on nsm@dispatch.co.za. Otherwise, for tonight, dear viewers, our discussion ends here. Thank you so much. Good night and goodbye.